Okay. So my name is Julie Newton, and these are my ancestors. So I have my grandparents here, John and Ida, and Ida's parents are over there. Grandpa Fulcher is over there with his wife. The story I want to tell today is about Art Newton, who was the youngest child of these people. Now, John was also in the Coast Guard, and he served at Cape Lookout. Ida, of course, was from here, and her family was here. And they met, and they had 3 children. Well, they had 4 children, but David over here only lived to be about 2. But they had 3 surviving children, the youngest of which was my father, Art Newton. Now, my grandmother was in Dix Hill Hospital in Raleigh, and that's where she died when my father was 14. So he and Grandpa came for the funeral from the Outer Banks, and on the way back from the funeral a few days later, were in a car accident that took his life. So Dad lost both parents when he was 14 within a week. So he wound up coming and staying with Aunt Hetty. They had a store in town, and he spent his time when he wasn't in school making deliveries for the store and doodling and drawing, and he drew on everything. His teacher said he was always drawing, so they knew he had a talent to be an artist. But this is where he grew up, and he loved Southport. He graduated from Southport High School, and he went off to Ohio and took some art classes. And then when the war came, World War II, he joined the Coast Guard like his father before him and his brother. And he served 4 years in the Coast Guard where he was a photographer. So he traveled and took a lot of photographs. As soon as he was out of the Coast Guard, he went back to his schooling in New York, and he studied at some art schools in New York. He even did cartoonist, illustration. He worked at a print shop. He did whatever he could, and he would always come back home and bring all of his paintings and stage a show and sell his paintings. And that's where he met my mom when she was 17. She had moved here from Fayetteville, and she came to help man the registration table for his art show. And she said he took her to lunch and proposed to her that day. She thought he was crazy, but he went back to New York and wrote letters to her and finally convinced her to marry him. So they got married and went back off to New York and stayed in the little New York studio apartment until their first son was born. And when John was 6 months old, Dad said, "We can't raise our children in New York. We need to go back to Southport." So he came back to Southport not knowing how he was going to make it work, but he did anything. He said he would paint houses, he would paint billboards, and he did it all. He did photographs, he did greeting cards, whatever he could. He was commissioned to do paintings for City Hall and the police, the library. So I grew up seeing his artwork all around town. So the Cape Fear Jewelers downtown is where he had his first studio, and he had art supplies that he would sell. He taught lessons. They lived in the back, and the guy that's there now is like, I don't know how anybody lived in the back of here, but they did. And eventually he built a house. They had 3 children by then, and he decided he wanted to live on the waterfront, so they moved down to the oldest house in Southport, and that's where we were living when I was born. And that's where he had his studio up on the 3rd floor because he loved the river, and he was always fishing and painting all the scenes. So we have a book that Tommy Harrelson did that collected a lot of the artwork, a lot of the paintings from around the country that people had bought over the years. He captured on film the Southport of the 50s, basically, when it was a small, quaint fishing village, and he just loved it. So that's what he did. So I'm very thrilled that we have the book to keep his works around. Tragically, when I was 9 months old, he lost his life in the river. We were not home. We had gone over to the beach for a weekend or whatever, and we came back home, and he was not found, and they had a search party come look for him, and a couple of days later found his body. And so there was no witness. Although there were people that said they saw him on his boat in the water. So, the river he loved and the Coast Guard, it's kind of ironic that he died there, but So I never knew him, but I grew up hearing all the stories about him and seeing all of his artwork, and so I feel like I knew him that way. And that's my story about Art Newton.